I greet you with peace. My name is Tiffany Steinward, and I am the Dean of Hendricks Chapel. And it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce to you tonight one of my dearest friends and colleagues, the Reverend Dr. Kirk VanGilder. I first met Kirk in graduate school where we were studying practical theology together. I say that at some point I was supposed to be the teacher and Kirk was the learner, but in fact we were always co-learners together. I soon found out that if I had a question about anything, and I mean anything, Kirk was the person to ask. He today is one of our nation's leading practical theologians. From his engaging scholarship to brilliant insights, Kirk shakes the foundation not just of the church, but of theological establishments. He asks questions no one has dared to ask before, and suggests answers in a nonchalant, unassuming way that has the power to revolutionize not just the field, but the world. Kirk VanGilder was born hard of hearing before losing more hearing in late adolescence and transitioning into the deaf world. He is an ordained United Methodist clergy person and has served as a minister in deaf churches in Baltimore and Pasadena, Maryland, as well as a campus minister to Gallaudet University. And what is not included in the script I prepared is he also served as co-pastor of Cambridge Welcoming Ministries with me, and I don't know how I left that out of the official bio. Kirk has also traveled to Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Turkey to work with deaf community development and support. His dissertation, which has now been published as a book, is called Making Sadza with Deaf Zimbabwean Women, a missiological reinterpretation of the practical theological method. Kirk hopes to continue his travels and research in other countries, as well as present his findings and experience to a wide variety of scholarly and non-scholarly audiences. The event tonight is a wonderful collaboration across campus of many different departments and offices coming together. Hendricks Chapel, the Interfaith Student Council, Interfaith Student Alliance, the Secular Student Alliance, the Disability Student Union, the Disability Cultural Center, the Center on Human Policy, Law, and Disability Studies, the Department of Religion, the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee, and CUES ASL. So without further ado, I invite you to welcome Dr. Kirk VanGilder.
I'm actually going to wait just a couple of minutes to see if we can take care of technical issues with the cart that's supposed to be showing up on the screen here. So hold on for just a second. We'll see what happens. I know some people are actually going to be dependent on reading the captions as they go, oh, here we go. I see them on the screen right now. So. Tiffany, thank you so much for the introduction. Her name sign is indicative of her height. Something related to religion tonight, as well as disability, deaf, secularism, and identity. So let's see, how many pieces of that I have to, let's see if I could mix them all together, juggle them up in the air and drop them on the floor, and then put them all together and create something that's a synthesis of the diverse issues and the ideas, and put them into one brief lecture. This is the task that Tiffany gave to me. So this is actually an open topic that I'd like to have a dialogue with each other tonight. Maybe I can give you some ideas of what I'm thinking about to lead the discussion, but to start with, I'd like to talk about what conversations are happening here at Syracuse University and what the campus is facing, what issues the campus is facing within the community of Syracuse University. So here's my fancy title, Without Walls. It should be Without Walls and then colon, what temporary deaf spaces can tell us about managing identity politics. So identity labels, as you can see on this slide here. Hello, my name is, and then I have to pick one identity to put on that sticker when I introduce myself to a new community. Hello, my name is, what identity do I pick? Out of all the collections that make up who you are and your identity, as you can see up here, we have a selection from disabled to jock to Latina to blind, how do you pick one of those? Maybe you have multiple identities within one person. So to say, hello, my name is Kirk, what does that mean to you to know that I label myself as Kirk? Or maybe from your perspective, what does that mean when you think of what a Kirk is? And then what does that say when I say, my name is Kirk? What does that mean for me? And that's the identity that I've chosen to label myself with. So we start to use labels to describe who we are, and then we get a vision of all the different labels that we attach to ourselves and we attach to other people. We love labels and we also hate labels. America has a love-hate relationship with labels, but labels are very vital, very critical, and we use them, we have to embrace them to label ourselves. But if you conversely label someone else, that person may not take that label right away. So we're going to be talking about identity, and we're going to think about the vocabulary and the language we use and the concepts we use about identity. But language can also be a way to segregate ourselves and can have a negative impact on how we identify ourselves and what groups we choose to identify with. Maybe we have multiple names and multiple identities, and how do we begin to manage these multiple identities to converse with people and to share a part of who we are? And then when you meet another person or several other people in the community, how do you develop community and group identity with everyone having their individual labels and the many identities that they have and the plethora of identities that we bring together? How do we as a community get group identity? And identity, that label, does not have to be permanent. Who you are right here, right now, tonight, listening to my presentation, is very different from who you were yesterday afternoon, or maybe after this lecture when you sit and have a nice chat with a friend, or when you go home and you visit your family. Who you are in that situation, or who you are when you go out to party tonight, is different than who you are right now. So that changes, is influenced by who you are dialoguing with, and it's not a permanent thing. It's fluid. It's very flexible. It moves very easily from one identity to another. So we have that love-hate relationship with labels, and those labels can be fixed. Those identities can be fixed, but they don't have to be fixed. They don't always have to be fixed. Labels are fixed, but identities are not fixed. Labels are used to describe identity, so that's where we see a problem, a tension, how you understand yourself in a diverse world as a person who is very diverse yourself. So on the slide here, I have about 20 or 25 different labels that encompass culture, disability, deaf identity or blind, gender identity, political identity, and social economic class identity as well. So there's a selection of identities up here on the slide, and those are embraced by us. And those are sometimes identities that are given to us generationally, and sometimes that we create ourselves. Or maybe from high school to college, we transition to identity, or college to graduate school. These are identities that we create for ourselves. So, when you leave high school, you can say, okay, I've left high school's in the past, I'm moving on to college. Maybe as an undergrad you were party hardy instead of studying hard, or maybe not, I don't know, it depends on the individuals in the room here. But you can recreate your identity yourself. You select the labels, and you can inherit those labels as well. So think about how labels fuse with identities, as you can see on this slide here. What often happens, and why we often despair and disparage these labels, is that when we try to see each of these identities as individual, society has specific definitions for these labels, most of the time. Most of the time when they say this identity is such and such, they mean a specific definition. But it's an impossibility to have these identities all converge. And again, it creates a false sense of segregation. It would be nice if we had these specific lines between different identities, but by identity lines blur. It's very messy. And you try to pick these identities, and you can have some complex situations arise. My first class at Gallaudet University, I walked right in, sat down, and a discussion ensued. Everybody had to introduce themselves. And that class was a required class. It was cultural identity, and it was very open. It was kind of a who you are. This first assignment was to write a 2-page paper about who you are. And then we had to share what we had written with the class. So we kind of opened up about who we were and delved into each other's identities. And one student came up to the front of the class and said, this is my name. And she identified herself as a straight woman, but people often consider her as a lesbian, she says, because she says, my boyfriend is a woman. And half the class kind of went, huh? What? A straight woman who most people think is a lesbian because her boyfriend is a woman. So we had to kind of unpack that and see what that meant. Identifying straight means she identified as a woman, as of the sex of woman, but she was transgendered, and the person that she was in a relationship with is a boyfriend who was transgendered, but who was a performing artist who did not perform as that specific gender. So she was attracted to the male gender, not the actual sex of that person. So she identified herself as straight, but people read her as a lesbian because they saw who she was in a relationship with. And then they were thinking, well, this is a woman with another woman. So she introduced herself to class this way, and I thought, wow, that is fantastic. I mean, she has a clear understanding of her identity. And I was automatically able to look around the room and see who had not even thought about these kind of identities issues before. It was just a great opening class, and it was just a great way to kind of open the box and unpack what is an identity and how are identities put together. I'm going to introduce the concept of deaf gain here with this slide. I'll let you read the quote here. The quote, it says, at the onset of his deafness, and in parentheses, performing artist Aaron Williamson consulted many doctors, and they all told him the same thing. You're losing your hearing. He wondered why it was that not a single doctor told him he was gaining his deafness. So this is kind of reframing of the expectation of what hearing loss is. The opposite of hearing loss is deaf gain. When you lose something in a gradual way, then you perhaps benefit at something and you gain a different identity. So that concept actually is very popular right now in the scholarly world. Cultural identity and production and how that is produced and shown to the larger society. So if a person is deaf, then that means something that no one else in society compared to this person has that deafness. Because we are deaf, we give this, and without us deaf people in the society, there would not be hearing people, for example. You wouldn't have the dichotomy. So Williamson came up with this idea about deaf gain. Very interesting. There's a picture of him here, and he lives in England, in London. And he got a license to be a street performer, a busker. London is kind of an interesting city. If you visit there and you're walking the streets, you'll see various people performing, and Williamson was one of them. So he set up an old phonograph with kind of a very, very old record player, an antique, and it would play opera music. And he, dressed to the nines in a tuxedo, would begin to sing with the music, completely deaf. with no idea whether what he was pronouncing vocally was matching what was being played with the music. So he would just go ahead and perform very seriously, as an opera singer is wont to do, and then he would notice people's reactions, their facial expression, just saying, what the heck, this guy's not matching the music at all, it sounds terrible, what, should we say something to him? And as the performance was going on, he would completely seriously continue to sing, and he would see that people in the audience were realizing that he was a very lousy musician, and then he would have a break, an intermission, and he would start signing away with a friend. And everyone in the audience would realize, oh my gosh, he's deaf. And so everyone else, all of the hearing people, would say, who had just been saying what a lousy musician he was, were completely embarrassed, shamefaced, sheepishly saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize you were deaf. And they would, hand him a bunch of money. So he would just, very, very clever gig there. But so he would react to the crowd and how they would be making assumptions of him as a musician, a singer, and how they would change as soon as they realized he was deaf. So he performed as a deaf person. He was a performing artist. So he wasn't presenting himself as a deaf person as he was singing. He was presenting himself as a performing artist. So to think about the idea of deaf gain is to think about the flip of deaf being losing something. But think of it as being deaf and gaining something in becoming deaf. The two professors on the slide here are both Gallaudet University professors, and they have really delved into this scholarship, the idea of identity and deaf gain. And they liken this to the idea of helping people who are trying to be snowboarders. So how one person looks at deaf snowboarders competing as they're, I see we can see on TV on sports right now, on the X Games, you can see, deaf people who are snowboarding and how they adapt and accommodate, how they're able to read the snow by feel with balance and vibration. And then compared to competitors who are hearing, they are able to maneuver and navigate through the snow by hearing. So they can hear where the snow is weak and where the snow is strong, because they're able to take those cues audibly. So these two Gallaudet University professors, again, looked at deaf snowboarders and realized that their reaction time was much quicker than the hearing snowboarders, because they were able to rely more quickly on their feeling rather than the hearing competitors who had to listen to the snow and be able to maneuver through it. There was a Swedish coach who trained their hearing snowboarders to put earplugs in, forcing them to begin to develop that sense of being able to rely on their feeling. And their competition and their ability to compete at a higher level increased. So that's just one example of deaf gain, and how you look at a situation and see what deaf people are doing and see that maybe they're doing something much more efficiently than the everyday common hearing person or the everyday deaf person who might not be in that specific field, to see what they are learning and what they can benefit the rest of the community, instead of looking at deaf people as, oh my gosh, those poor people, oh my gosh, that poor man, he cannot sing. All they have to do is they have to, go through the snow by feeling, as opposed to saying, you know what, they might be able to do something much more efficiently, and can we apply that to everyone else? And we can help hearing people take advantage of that. So the researchers are looking at what deaf people bring from our unique experience of being deaf, what we're able to provide to the world at large. So that's just one example. But to think bigger picture,
biodiversity. When we think about the environment, environmental issues, everything depends on everything else. Things in an ecosystem are interdependent on each other. This is the fish depend on the water and the currents, and The currents clean the water, and everything's interrelated at the Great Barrier Reef. If the water wasn't right, the fish would die. If the temperature is too high, the fish would die. They need each other. So the concept of biodiversity demonstrates that it's critical to have diversity. And human diversity follows the same logic. So in studying ecology and ecosystems at the Great Barrier Reef, this has eroded in biodiversity. Everything's been dying slowly. And same thing with Brazil in the rainforests. And the number of unique species has been drastically decreasing. That's because the rainforest is dying. So when we think of human diversity, really the goal is to become more conformist. If that happens, then we die. The biodiversity dies within human biodiversity. So when we think of it as a larger system, a flourishing system, the point is that for a system to be able to flourish, there needs to be a great deal of diversity. And when everything is whittled down and weeded out to become the same, that takes away from the vibrancy of the society and doesn't allow it to flourish. You need to have diversity in order to have growth. And that's the point of having a healthy system. Instead of having a goal for everybody to become the same, that leads to a dead end. Everything needs to be changed to be diverse because that biodiversity is key when imagining a society that has positive value. It's the same concept with deaf gain. We bring to society something that society and can use, deaf people and disabled people. Without that, biodiversity decreases. So those things that we bring to society, if they're missing, that represents a partial collapse of society. Without what we contribute, that part is missing and diversity is less. This is all part of biodiversity and a network of interdependence. If one piece is missing, then diversity is lessened greatly. So how do we deal with this on an individual level? The answer is pretty interesting. Dr. Joanne Nagel from the University of Kansas, she's a sociologist, is pictured on the slide. And below her is Dr. Richard Clark Eckert from the University of Wisconsin in Richmond. They have a concept of a portfolio of identities. Dr. Joanne Nagel is hearing and Dr. Eckert is deaf. They have suggested the idea of a portfolio of identities. If you're an art major, an architecture major, a business major even, a writing major, you have a portfolio. If you're a photographer, you'll have a portfolio. And that will display your best work that you've selected from your entire body of work. So when people want to see your work before they hire you as a photographer or whatever, then you have something to demonstrate and it's ready to go. And that shows your best self, the portfolio. Depending on the job, you may prioritize a particular picture over another picture. You know, you might be hired as a wedding photographer, and so you would want to prioritize showing examples of couples that you've already taken pictures of. You would want to show that right up front in the interview. Or same thing with a newspaper reporter. You know, if they're going to be hired as a newspaper reporter, someone would want to put their best news photos up front rather than their wedding photos. There's a variety of different skills that photographers can possess, but which one they might put up front would change depending on the situation, whichever one applies to the situation that they're trying for. So the identity portfolio is the concept of having all the labels that we accept for ourselves. The big question in the deaf-black community is, which are you first? Are you black first or are you deaf first? That's a very common question in the black-deaf community. Most in the black-deaf community reject that question altogether. They're both, and that's all there is to it. And you can't prioritize one over the other, being black or being deaf. And when the black-deaf community is together as a family, they feel that as being black and deaf rather than just being around black people or just being around deaf people. In Gallaudet, most of the students are white. Maybe a black deaf student would feel more deaf in that situation than black because they're more aware of the racial difference in that setting. So how you prioritize your identities, sometimes you can't in situations like that. A more healthy way to manage the variety of identities is to have this concept of a portfolio of identities. And that includes your individual identities and how you prioritize them differently depending on the situation. You don't stop being one identity in order to become another identity, but you might prioritize a particular identity over another depending on the situation that you're in. And that's just a way to manage conflicting identities through that portfolio.
So we're going to talk about the idea of power and how you have a discourse about power. How do you manage these multiple identities and how you interact with the world, where perhaps the world does not value one of your identities as much as another one. Up on the slide here we have Bell Hooks, and she teaches at Berea University. She is looking at the topic of postmodern and postmodern blackness. A lot of black scholars say they don't value that idea, value that discussion of other, or mostly that's focusing on people who are European or some other thing. So black scholars don't value the concept of postmodernism, but Bell Hooks disagrees. She talks about the idea of difference and otherness, that you can't really separate the category of race or gender or black. If you forget to talk about what it means to be black or what it means to be a woman, then you're missing one piece of that discussion. And other conversations may be talking about different identities, and they overlook a discussion that doesn't include black or women, for example. So you can't look at one piece of who you are without also talking about the other pieces. So that fits the model of the portfolio that I was just mentioning. And how the identities interact is not always in an equal way, and there is power in that conversation. There's also another scholar here by the last name of Spivak from Columbia University. She wrote a very groundbreaking essay entitled, "Can the Subaltern Speak?" Can that subaltern speak? So her concern is not that it's a yes-no answer. That's not the kind of question that she was posing in her essay. They, of course, can speak, but her concern was more, is anyone listening to the subaltern? Is anyone listening to what they have to say? That was her point. So to answer the question, can the subaltern speak, her point is more, let's hang on here just a second. The people that we are studying who are oppressed, we are the oppressors. You know, we're looking at what these oppressed people, what their lives mean, who they are, and we never ask them to speak for themselves. There's this scholarly dialogue about what's happening and what's happening with the subaltern, but we're not including them in the discussion. their self-expression is not included in that conversation, and that's what her concern was. It's not a yes-no question. Instead, it's a, excuse me, let's step aside and let's let the people who we are studying, let them speak for themselves. So her goal, her agenda is post-colonial studies, and she wants to move aside from that and have the experts step aside and let the subaltern people develop their own expression. Let them figure out where they're going and where they've come from. And that the experts should not look over them as oppressors and discuss their lives, but should listen to them. And experts should also not write the meaning of the subaltern's life, but let the subaltern culture talk about their meaning for them. So the question is more, is anyone listening? And I hope so, but often no one's listening to subalterns speak. Her point overall, again, is to just step back and let these people speak for themselves. We talk about the concept of agency, and it's one thing to tell the public narrative, but the other issue is to actually become the guiding light of your own agency, to invent your own story. I could talk about my experience as being oppressed and how I've been oppressed, but if I can't change my story, ultimately, I'm still oppressed. So something simple as letting people speak about their oppressed experience is not enough. You have to allow them to write their own story and to be in control of how their story is ending and how it's being shared. It's a very big challenge, and it's a very powerful connection between discourse and power. So letting people speak for themselves and also letting their stories guide themselves before we predetermine where their life is going and how their life will end. So that's a big concern of this scholar Spivak. One more thing from deaf studies on this slide here. We're going to be speaking about transnational deaf identity here. And transnational is a very hot topic in the field of scholarly research right now, and it's looking at how, for example, the African-American experience and the African experience and the African-Cuban experience, how they are similar and how their identities are networked. I mean, each of them has a unique identity and they each have their unique experiences, but there are some similarities in how their identities are shaped. And the transnational deaf identity study is in fact very similar. Deaf people, as they travel the world and meet people who are deaf from other countries, even though they each speak a different sign language, they have each been brought up in a different culture and have had different experiences growing up, and they have quite a few differences, there is still an automatic connection between deaf people from different countries because they have kinship. They have an automatic connection. This gentleman at the top of the slide, Amos Draper, was from the 1800s. In 1889, he traveled to the first International Deaf Congress, and that was happening in France. On the way, he stopped by London, and he presented to an audience of working-class deaf British people. And their sign language is very different than American Sign Language, so they're, of course, they somehow made themselves understood. Amos Draper was a very well-educated leader in the deaf community, but the people in the audience were, factory workers, working-class, deaf British people. And in America, the culture was there was quite a bit of support for people who are deaf, and in Britain, it was a very different experience. But what Amos Draper shared with the audience was a quote from William Shakespeare. On the slide, it's, "One touch of nature makes the whole world kin." And to Amos Draper, that one touch was being deaf. He stood up there as an American deaf man and said, "I'm deaf," and said to the British people, "You are deaf, and we are kin." And if you look at how deaf people the world over connect with each other, it's very fascinating. I've gone to Kenya, I've traveled to Zimbabwe, and I've also been to Turkey. And I've worked with deaf communities in those 3 countries. And each, of course, had their different language than what I was used to as American Sign Language. They each had their own culture, their environment, their values. Everything was very different than my experience. Socioeconomic status was very different. The political, the national power was quite diverse in these 3 countries. There were many things that on paper should have kept us apart. But the one thing that bonded us instantly was we were all deaf. We had 2 weeks together in one of these places, never spent any time apart, and at the end of that time, we were all in tears because we had to leave each other. I went to Zimbabwe, and I worked with a group of deaf and hearing people together to develop a curriculum for deaf education in Zimbabwe. And most of the week was spent working with hearing people, developing this curriculum specifically. And then 2 days was spent visiting with a preschool, a deaf preschool, a deaf club that had a program for deaf people in the community. And I just dove right in with both feet and just was able to connect with these people. They were my people. They were my friends. I was able to just kind of hang out with them and see what was going on in their lives and share this commonality with them about being deaf. And with the hearing people, it was a very official tour. They went off and did what they wanted to, and I was like, I'm staying with these people. I'm connecting with these people on a kinship level. And when it was time to leave, they talked about everything they had heard and everything they had learned about, these were the hearing people. They talked about everything they learned during that week, and I was like, I want to stay with, the deaf folks, my community here. And several times, the hearing people had to kind of nudge me like, the bus is leaving, we got to go. Got to get back to the hotel. We got these workshops, these curriculums we got to get going to. And every time I felt like, going back into isolation. It was a very emotional, painful time for me to be able to have to disconnect from the deaf people that I'd met there. And the hearing people in this group had no idea. It was an eye-opening experience for them to see this instant connection between me and the deaf Zimbabweans. And that touch of nature, that being deaf, was the one thing that led us to being kinship. And the hearing people who was on the trip were able to make friends with some of the hearing Zimbabweans, but they didn't have that deep, bone-deep connection that I had with the deaf Zimbabweans, because we were able to talk about our experience of being isolated or oppressed or misunderstood. So it was just interesting, fascinating, that I was able to benefit so much more from being with the deaf Zimbabweans than my hearing colleagues were able to benefit being with the hearing Zimbabweans. So how do you notice this touch of nature? That's one example. This touch of nature is being deaf. But why don't you think about what the touches of nature are in your life? Gender, or how you identify yourself in one way that gives you that touch of nature that you're able to be kin with someone else, and take advantage of that to build collaborations and partnerships. What deaf people tend to do is create temporary deaf spaces, because there is no deaf part of the community. There is no deaf part of town. We've got one part where there's a lot of people from Puerto Rico who live here, or there are a lot of people over here who are, from Chinatown, but we don't have, like, the deaf town. We're scattered all over in whatever community we live in. And most of the deaf people have parents who are hearing. And most deaf couples, when they expand their family and have children, the children are hearing. The only parallel to the experience of deaf people as being a one-generational experience is the LGBT community, because a lot of GLBT people have parents who are straight, who don't identify as GLBT, or gay couples tend to adopt kids, and the kids don't necessarily grow up and identify as being gay. So again, there's no deaf part of town. And there used to be things such as deaf clubs, deaf churches, where deaf people would congregate as the community, but they have really dwindled and gone by the wayside as people have discovered other ways to connect, like through texting or email or Facebook, or that's really generational right now, creating what deaf space is, what is that deaf identity, and what that connection means. And it's really changing with the technology that's out there right now. There's a lot more reliance on temporary space. And deaf camps, where children who come together for 1 week in the summertime, and they're all deaf, and they hang out, and they have that great camping experience, and they have a very valuable week in their lives. And then the other 51 weeks of the year, they don't have deaf camp. But for 1 week, they are deaf with every other deaf kid there is. They're all sharing that touch of nature, that kinship. At a big, when you have a big international deaf convention, when the deaf congregants come to that convention center, that convention becomes the deaf space. And as the end of the convention nears, those people start to figure out, how can we still connect and how can we still have kinship even as we go back to our separate lives? So that's the temporary space. They create that space and they call it deaf. Another example of this, of temporary space, is at a gay nightclub or a gay dance club. That's a temporary space, because it used to be like in the 80s and 90s. You know, most clubs didn't have, you know, like most gay clubs weren't able to continue and to make ends meet and to have, like, be gay, you know, 100% of the time. They might have, like, every Thursday night is gay night, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is straight night or mixed night, you know, or Wednesday is the gay night, or Monday is lesbian night. And that became a temporary space. And it was created and it was held by the people who came to that space. And it was very valued. It was a very safe space for people to be able to mingle with like people. But the rest of the week, that space was not safe. That one night was their space. It was worth it. It was valuable. And during the day, maybe that space, that, you know, gay club or whatever club it is, was completely empty. There was nothing on the walls, perhaps. But at that night, the lights were dimmed. You know, the techno pop was booming, the lights were flashing, and the people were out on the dance floor, a sweaty mess. And that became magic. It was magical. So the point is that a place or a space, you know, was magical at that point. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, when the bar closed and the lights were raised, you know, the magic was gone as you were looking out at these other people here. And they would close the bar. You know, they all had that same experience. But when the lights came on, it felt like, oh, it's kind of an ugly building. You know, there's really not anything on the walls here. But while you were dancing, you know, wow, this is a great space, the coolest place on earth. This is the gay place. Oh, look at the lights coming up. Oh, I guess it's kind of dingy, you know, it's kind of drab walls. So that is a temporary space. During the actual use of that space, it becomes magical. It becomes identified and bonded in that one moment and becomes a temporary space. So deaf people use temporary space, and gay people use temporary space as well. Religious communities can also use temporary space. One example is the Hajj. In Islam, one of the 5 foundations of the faith is that people are expected, at least once in their lifetime, to make the journey to Mecca. That is the goal, is to get there. And there is a Kaaba, K-A-B-A, there's a Kaaba box there. But the Hajj is a little bit different. The Hajj is a temporary space. There are millions of Muslims from around the world, different cultures, different socioeconomic status, different languages, all dressed alike, all doing the same procession, all having that experience, that movement of the Hajj. Their multiple identities coalesce into one. They are Muslim. And the worldwide Ummah means community, and it can be seen and touched and felt and experienced right there. And the rest of the year, diversity can be very overwhelming. You know, maybe a Muslim lives in Saudi Arabia, and how a Muslim lives in Saudi Arabia can be different than how one lives in another country or how one lives in America. But during the Hajj, when they make that procession to Mecca, they have kinship. And that is the implementation of Islam worldwide. The Middle-Aged Christian Community Center is a temporary space. The cathedral, you know, is very permanent, and most of the time it's empty in a cathedral. But on Sundays, the priests would be speaking Latin in the Middle Ages. I don't know what they were talking about. You know, they're just kind of speaking Latin, and I wouldn't be able to understand it. But then the minute the bread was raised, everything would stop, and all eyes would be raised and look at that bread that was being broken by the priest and the cup that was being raised by the priest. And that became a temporary space. Regardless of the diversity in the congregation, regardless of whether anyone was able to understand any one word that the priest spoke in Latin, that raising of the bread and cup bonded everyone in a kinship. So thinking about deaf temporary spaces is quite a powerful idea. How identity coalesces with temporary space. And maybe that's a possible solution for managing these diverse identities. How do we define and design temporary spaces? How do we make these connections? You know, maybe the rest of the year we can't, or the rest of the week we can't. Maybe the community has infighting or is fighting with another community. Is there some way to develop and create a temporary space to bring these people together? It might be a week, just 1 week long. And then they go back to fighting for the 51 weeks of the year. And then maybe another week next year becomes 2 weeks. And then they begin to understand each other, and that temporary space has power and meaning and importance. And one more example of temporary space is on the next slide here.
Do you recognize this? This is a temporary space. Most students don't realize it. Most don't realize it. Even the faculty may not realize it. But every year, students come and go. They come and go, new admissions, graduations. You know, maybe they stay for 5 or 6 or 7 years. But, you know, if it's an undergraduate, it could be a 6 or 7 year plan. But they come and then they go. That's the point. So when I started at Gallaudet, I had a friend of mine. He used to be my campus minister. And he said, good luck, when I first got there. And the second thing he said was, you're preaching to the parade. You stand in a place, and the students in the community will parade by you. Every 4 or 5 years, there will be a completely new group of people. You can never rest. You can never assume anything. And the parade will keep moving. Just a procession will continue, and that has proven to be true. I stayed at Gallaudet for 5 years, most of my freshman year, and then I graduated and moved on. The freshmen that I had been preaching to had moved on, and that proved itself as a temporary space. That community was temporary. Everyone had wonderful time together for the time that they were there, and then they went back to where they came from. Right now at spring break, everyone's gone. I stopped by my office before I came here to pick up a few things, and the campus was completely empty. Instead, There were groups of hearing high school students who were touring during their spring break, coming to see what Gallaudet was like, wanting to see what a deaf university was like. And it was the strangest thing in the world to go into Gallaudet and see all of these hearing people. Very bizarre. But it struck me when I noticed that. Every year, it happens in the summer too. The students leave the campus and outside groups come in for summer training programs and various things. It's interesting to sit there and watch that parade change. So a university is a temporary space. They already exist as that. Now we're going to talk about Judith Butler from the University of California. Her idea is that gender is something that is performed. Your body has a sex assigned to it. It might be a male or a female or intersex. There's a wide range. You may opt for surgery to change something during your lifetime, but sex is not necessarily fixed. It's fluid. Gender is completely different. It might be related to sex, but if someone's sex is male or female or intersexed, their gender may be masculine, feminine, or something in between. Transgender is what we call that. There's a wide range. Who they are in the morning may be different from the gender that they're performing in the afternoon. They might go back to work with a suit and tie, they get home and change into a dress. How you perform your gender is how you express yourself. That's a social construct. It depends on how you perform it. So you're always on the stage. That stage is where we perform all of our different identities. I'm deaf now, but it might be different from how I'm deaf at Gallaudet, or how I'm deaf with my other deaf friends. How I'm a man now, or how I'm a man later in the day, how I'm a man later when I'm at home watching basketball, these are all different identities of being a man. We perform those identities, and we can continue to recreate those. They're not fixed. They're not permanent identities. Identity itself is a temporary space. It is a stage on which you stand and perform. This stage on the slide is empty. It represents an opportunity. So going back to the big stage, Syracuse University. There might be disabled people discussing things. There might be the deaf community discussing things. Religious communities discussing things amongst themselves. Secular atheist groups discussing things. LGBT communities. Women's Rights Month. We have discussions about Women's History Month. All these various issues that we face. So do I go to the lecture with the deaf guy tonight or with the women's history lecture? You know, you have to decide. Thanks for coming, by the way. But these are decisions. How different identities pull us in different directions. How do they pull us in ways that bring us to different groups? Those are created temporary spaces. And you can take advantage of the temporary spaces that have already been created, such as the ones that we've discussed that are here at SU. One community might not understand another community, and there might be fighting. And that's when we need to figure out how to design a temporary space to bring those two together. IFYC, the Interfaith Youth Corps, got an award from last year for partnership and goals, for collaboration. Different religious groups didn't understand each other, didn't know how to receive each other, but when they got together, it served to help the community. You know, they could feed the homeless and have fundraisers together and not have to sit around and debate what the religions say and who's right and wrong, rather just get together and focus on the work that needs to be done. And maybe talk about other things that they have in common, like classes that they're taking as they're doing that service work. And they can learn from each other in those spaces in a much more natural way. That's a temporary space in action. So designing a temporary space really just means creating a collaboration between various groups. It can be kind of risky and scary, but it's a chance worth taking. So I've been talking for a while. I'm going to turn it over to the audience now to have a discussion about how SU uses temporary spaces. Maybe before you can answer that, where do we need to create a temporary space here at SU to come together on various things where we can have ideas without tearing people in half or in fourths or in eighths? We can allow that portfolio of identities and create a temporary space to honor the whole person. Where is the need for that here? That's my first question to you. And second, how would that happen? So I want you to have a discussion with each other about those two questions. And thank you. That's the end of my presentation. Any questions, comments, ideas? I leave it up to you. I'm yours for the rest of the time. And if someone has a question, please walk up to the microphone. There are a few microphones around the room. Also, we have interpreters if need be. Very quiet. Yes, we've got one brave soul.
Can you give an example of a permanent space?
That's a very good question. I think more permanent spaces are like social institutions. For example, we can talk about the Methodist Church. That's my denomination, so I can criticize my own church. The Methodist Church, as an institution, has boundaries that are permanent. Historically, they value these. They have a value system and a way of running things. Every several years, we have a meeting, we get together to discuss policies, etc. It's a general conference. Another name for that is complete chaos. Because there are 1,000 delegates representing millions of Methodists from all around the world trying to decide policies for the next 4 years. So every 4 years, we have the same fight, fighting about how to structure the church, fighting if we should include gay and lesbian people or not, and fighting about whether global churches are treated equally. It's the same arguments again and again. And we have a voting process. The committee meets, the policy is discussed, it's proposed, and then there's a decision. If you have 50% plus one vote, you win. That's a permanent space. That is a fixed way of doing things. Very fixed. All of the different interest groups are invested in that system. That is a fixed system. It's not a temporary space. we were just talking about how to change that. We're having a general conference instead of maybe having rows of chairs, maybe having small groups. Sitting people at round tables rather than in pews, for example. Like you're sitting at the dinner table. Did it work? There's no overnight change that's going to happen. But at the last general conference, it was really fascinating. The committee restructured the church. They didn't come up with a policy that they could all agree on, but they tried to come up with one that they could. And finally, it barely passed, the one that they did come up with that was proposed. But when it came down to it, it was against the constitutional principles, so it was rejected. So there was business that couldn't be finished. We were trying to change things, but we all had to leave. So does that mean that we failed or that we succeeded? What does that mean? But it's a permanent process. We have a fixed Congress and we come together and we have a process for this. We have a 50-50 vote. We can have a discussion. What's the process? Do we change the way that we make a decision? What are we doing in churches? We use Robert's Rules of Orders. It's very important to run our meetings. That's a permanent space. It could maybe become temporary, but I'm not sure. I guess we'll see what happens 4 years from now. But a social institution really represents a fixed way, a fixed pattern. It's not necessarily a negative thing. That's a permanent space, though. Sometimes people feel very intertwined with those things. But it can be an illusion. That's one thing that I've learned from Buddhism over the years, is that everything is an illusion. Everything is temporary when it comes down to it. Even if there's a permanent institution, it's still temporary, really. So when I think of something as permanent, it doesn't always mean that it's functioning in a permanent place. I think I would suggest temporary is more healthy than permanent. Temporary allows us to manage diversity in a more healthy way, rather than trying to set up a permanent structure and then follow it indefinitely. Temporary spaces allow for comfort and allow people to be comfortable with who they are. Any other comments or questions or ideas?
Hi. So I was wondering about the continuity issue. So if you have temporary spaces, lots of people talk about liminal space and interstitial space and the magic and promise that these create. And I agree with you. And I really appreciate you being here and all the wonderful things you shared with us, Kirk. Thank you. So if we want to have the magic of those liminal or interstitial or temporary spaces, how do we do that but still have a kind of continuity in the social justice work we want to do, since they're temporary?
Going back to that word kinship. Kinship can be permanent. Well, maybe not permanent, but it can have continuity. Kinship provides a relationship like a family. And a family is whatever you define it as. But it's really a partnership, a relationship that continues. And kinship can be passed on through the generations as well. And the next generation will most likely accept that because there is that established kinship. There might be changes, but relationships can change over time. But they still have that connection as kin. So that touch of nature that was described in this quote is really kinship. And without that, the magic goes away. It closes at 2 o'clock and the lights come on, the bar closes, everybody goes home, everybody's hungover the next day. That's not magical anymore. But that place is still there. What you experienced is still there. And how that affects your identity and your understanding of yourself is still there. You might decide to volunteer. Maybe you're an evangelical Christian and you want to do service work for homeless people. Or maybe you're a very strong Muslim and you end up volunteering with that evangelical Christian. And after a while, over that service work, you bond, you have discussions, and you realize that you're not so different after all. When that opportunity, that volunteer opportunity is gone, they go home. Maybe they never speak to each other again. Maybe they never meet another evangelical Christian ever again. But they had that moment, and they understand what it means to be Christian or to be Muslim because they came together in that moment. Not necessarily the idea, but the person. The kinship continues. Anyone else? I'm having fun. I don't know about you.
I'm actually quite loud, so I don't need a microphone. So I don't want to be that person, but I just want to find some common ground.
Go for it. Be that person.
Are you familiar with the term serial collectivity?
Yes.
Okay, so when you talk about kinship and these temporary spaces, obviously I can't help but think about serial collectivity. And the idea that people actually come together through collaboration, but because of some kind of relational object or idea or thing, right? And I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit to that, and feel free to reject that, because I understand I'm asking you to speak to my interest, and that's kind of unfair, but I see serial collectivity in this, but I'm wondering, do these temporary spaces allow for serial collectivity easily, or can serial collectivity create temporary spaces? Like, what's that relationship?
That's a very interesting question. You got me thinking about that now. I'm cooking up some ideas. The idea behind that is that people get together at different times for different purposes. Before this lecture, we were over there eating dinner in the other room. And the idea came up of having a coalition, meaning that the community, different communities, the concept of coalition is different from a concept of a community. So serial collectivity points to having a coalition for a common goal, and then dissolution when that goal is satisfied or realized. That can be a temporary space. If serial collectivity is more of an organic relationship, then it means you share a natural interest. You're different than me, but we both like to watch basketball. That's organic. You don't have a common goal that you're trying to satisfy. You just want to watch basketball together. Or maybe the Super Bowl. You know, maybe people get together to watch the Super Bowl every year. And are they watching the game, or are they eating food? You know, are they there for the football game, or are they there to enjoy each other's company? They come together for a goal to watch the game, but they have a relationship goal too. So there are various levels involved with that. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg scenario with temporary spaces. Serial collectivity develops from having a goal. or having a coalition. It's not to develop a community. It may happen on the way. You know, a temporary space might result from that, but they have a reason for coming together. That is more of a kinship. It might already be a temporary space. It might have been a temporary space before that because they already created a reason to come together. Like the football party. Everyone gets together, and it's not a real reason why they're coming together. It's just a nice, easy excuse to have a party. I mean, people go to football parties for the Super Bowl. Most don't watch the game. Most of them don't even like football. It's an excuse to have a party, really. Why not? That's a temporary space. And that's related to serial collectivity. So I'm not sure if it can be divided by having a leader or not, but having a coalition is different from having a community. The community has opportunities for temporary space. A coalition can lead to a temporary space, but it's not automatic. Does that answer your question? Get you thinking? Does it help?
Yeah, yeah. I guess a clarifying question I would ask would be, so I see the benefits politically of serial collectivity. I feel like in my own queer life, I understand the benefits of kinship or community. But what are the political benefits of kinship or community?
There are lots of political benefits with serial collectivity, because the goal is to have a goal, to achieve something, and then disband when that's realized. But the goal of a community is to socialize, to get together, to do things, and I just lost my train of thought. I had a really great comment and I lost it. Just one second.
Happens all the time.
Like the HUC and the NGTF, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. One's a single issue group that just supports gay and lesbian rights. HRC. That's all. That's their whole agenda. They have very clear policies and very clear goals. And that's a coalition agreement to work together to a common goal. When that goal is satisfied, or if they fail, that group will dissolve. The NGLTF, they want to approach many different issues. Social and economic justice. Their business becomes each other's business too. They're interested in equality issues, and they have many issues in common. They're looking more towards a permanent kinship. The result may be more of a community or maybe not, depending on how they go forward. But you see this popping up in church movements too. The Methodist Church group is reconciling the ministries network and including LGBT people. That's one goal. There's another group called the Inclusive Church, Church Within a Church movement, saying we don't need to ask permission from the church to run the church as we need to. Means that they can be inclusive, not marginalizing people, and they're fighting for that amongst all their various issues. There might be the same people involved in both groups, but their goals are, whether it's a single issue or many convoluted, numerous issues within the church. One just wants to change the church's inclusive policy, and the other one is, the one that wants to change the church's policy has a definite outcome. It's a dream, of course, but they want the Methodist Church to become inclusive. And they won't need to be together anymore when that happens. And the other group is more interested with the relationships amongst one another within the church. There is more of a political benefit with the first one. Both have political benefits, but the second one is more of a healthy approach to a holistic person. As a
So Black gay Methodists have come up to me and they are concerned about this reconciling ministry. They're concerned that perhaps this ministry is not looking at all their different identities as a Black gay Methodist. Whereas the other group, Church Within a Group, is looking at everything, is looking at gender inequality, racial inequality, social inequality, and looking at all those issues. The first group, the reconciling group, is a single issue piece. There's now a new group called the Black Ministry Church for Renewal, and they're a group of Black Methodist churches, and so people who are Black and gay and Methodist don't know which group they should be supporting, because different groups are fighting for one different part of their identity, whereas the Church Within a Church group is looking at the whole identity, the whole portfolio of who they are as a Black, gay Methodist. So they are working towards a common goal. And that group, the Church Within a Church, does not have a clear ending, whereas the other two I've mentioned, they have a clear endpoint. And it's nice, it might be successful, and it would make change, and that it would make needed change, but the Church Within a Church is offering more. It's transcending that. It's offering something beyond just a one-issue resolution, because it's looking at the whole identity portfolio, and it's looking at the person's whole life. I see Tiffany making notes at the back of the room here. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, can you build a kinship community based upon virtues, values, and commitments as opposed to, or in solidarity with, the portfolio of identity?
That's a very important question. I'm working with two philosophers and actually looking at teaching ethics right now. So where virtue is defined and how it's defined, where it comes from, and a lot of ideas about virtue and the origin of it. And that is shaped by community's experience and generational experience. Virtues might be from a temporary place or an identity. A virtue can also be something that's performed by being good. You know, being good is a virtue. Being a good person, and then you perform goodness, and then you become a good person. So that's can be an identifier as well. Trust is a virtue. If you trust someone, that's a virtue. But I don't know in this audience who I can trust, except for a couple people that I know. I believe I can trust them. But they have performed that they are trustworthy, and so they are a trustworthy person. Virtue comes from how you perform something. So that has a parallel to how we talk about identity, this identity portfolio. How you perform your identities and how you show who you are. And virtue and identities do have a connection. That connection can be broken by a vice, for example. Perhaps someone performs falsely who they are. That's a vice. Or maybe they present one way, but they act in a different way. So they are two-faced, as it were. And that can be a vice as well. So thinking about virtues, they can build community and they can build commonality. And the virtues in the community are coming from the same place. So virtues and identity are not that separate. I think in some ways we should flip the whole conversation about identity and talk about virtues. What virtues and values do we hold in common? And what of my virtues and values are different than yours? And can we create temporary spaces where our virtues and values can combine, and where we can have a dialogue with each other? So it's the same process that we've been speaking about with temporary spaces and with identity. I'm going to go back to the SU slide and have that just up here as a, I like the picture there. It's a really nice picture. Any more? Yeah.
You were talking about the transition between identity when you were saying perhaps an undergraduate has an identity then, and then when they're going to become a graduate student, then they have a different identity. For myself, I'm hard of hearing, and throughout undergraduate school, I just struggled as a hearing person because I don't really do sign language. I kind of read lips, I prefer to read, but that didn't really, I didn't go to a school where that was really understood. So my identity became one of, I guess, sort of struggle and trying to adapt to the environment and sort of fool people into thinking that I could hear much better or that I was a hearing person. And that also, I don't go to school here, I work, I have a job. And that's another space in which I sort of have to adapt to everyone else. But now I have the opportunity where I have been accepted to graduate school, and I might be able to transition into an environment where I will be able to perhaps have a different identity, which is more truthful to myself as a hard of hearing person, where I will have the assistive technology available. So what would you say to somebody that is making the transition from one identity to another, when for so long it's just been that identity of not a really true deaf person, but then trying to become that because it just feels more comfortable, and then sort of having to be an academic in that way also?
I can speak. It speaks. I grew up hard of hearing. I did not use sign language. Both my father was hard of hearing, he doesn't sign. He's also in denial, but yeah, he uses hearing aids, but this and that. If you ask my mom, they dated all the way through high school and then they got married, you know, traditional story. If you ask my mom, he was losing his hearing in high school. If you ask my dad, it was after high school. I tend to believe mom on that. So yeah, I grew up with that. I did not know sign language until I really came into my undergraduate years, and I began that transition. The first thing I have to say, you can do it. The second thing I have to say is it won't be easy. So let me transition back for a second.
I can sign. I work at Gallaudet University, and I sign with everyone on campus. I leave my hearing aids at home because I can. I have, deaf people around me. I have interpreters around me. I perform in my identity as a deaf person. But I can also perform as a hearing person or as a hard of hearing person, and all of those identities are in my portfolio. And I developed the skill to be able to do that. I developed the relationships to be able to encourage those identities. So at home, I speak with my parents, and I become a hearing person. When I come back to work after break, I'm a deaf person again. It's very odd. And then my housemates are all hearing, so I speak with them. I go to work, and I use my sign language. So somewhere on the train from my house to campus in Washington, D.C., somewhere in that train, magically, I become a deaf person or back to a hearing person on the way home. I don't know how that happens, but in my commute, that's how it happens, and I transition between the two. So I can see two visions here, the deaf world and the hearing world becoming a bridge. These are different images that have been used, that the deaf world and the hearing world, and there being a bridge between there. I don't really like that idea about walking on a bridge between one or the other. But I also see myself as a frog. I grew up in the water, I was a tadpole in the water with my little tadpole tail, and then I grew my little legs, and then I hopped up onto land, and then I could breathe, but I still could get into the water again if I'd like to. I can sit on a log or on a lily pad, with the water up to my eyes if I want, or up to my mouth. And when I close my eyes like now, I have 2 different eyelids, and when I close one set of eyelids, I can look underwater, and then the other one is still clear, and I can see up to the sky. So I'm a frog. Frogs are not always pretty. Most people look at frogs and think, ugh. They don't think, oh my gosh, look at that adorable little frog. Like a puppy dog or a kitty cat. I mean, most people anyway. There are some frog people out there. But most people, they don't say, oh, look at the cute frog. Well, maybe you could find someone like that. But I'm a frog. Also, the frog population in the world is decreasing. Scientifically, scientists are very concerned about the number of frogs in the world. Globally, with all of the climate changes, how the earth is starting to raise its temperature, etc., there's less and less water, and many species of frogs are disappearing, and they are becoming endangered. So that's a biodiversity issue, because the world is dying, and the world needs frogs. Both the green hoppy frogs, but also people like me and like you, who are frogs who can transition, sit on the lily pad of the world and be able to look down into the water, but also look up into the land. But how to make that transition is something that you have to develop for yourself. And for me, it was the transition from undergrad to grad school. That's when I started working with interpreters full time. I started developing my sign language skills in my undergrad years, and thought that as soon as I got to grad school, I had enough of the fluency to be able to work with interpreters. And I didn't understand everything at first, but I was able to pick things up as I went along. And what I did was I looked for the deaf community. Wherever I could find deaf people, I just jumped right in. And it was very awkward, yes, I will admit that, because people were signing very quickly, and I wasn't able to understand everything they were saying. I didn't know if they were talking to me or someone behind me. But anyway, I was able to pick up the facility, the language. And I realized that growing up, all my life, I had been angry, and I didn't know it. I grew up angry, and I didn't know why. And something was missing, and I just couldn't name it. I didn't know what it was. And then when I found the deaf world, when I transitioned, that's when I realized I found this kinship. I found this missing piece. That's what had been missing all along. When the audiologist told me when I was 5, kind of patted me on the head and said, Kirk, there's something wrong with you. You need hearing aids. I will never remember that. That is burned on my brain, that memory. I was 5. To be 5 and to be told something wrong with you and that you need to have hearing tests over and over again, whether you pass or fail or get it right, and I was not passing. I knew I wasn't passing. Even at 5, I could feel it. I could feel that dread, and to be told there's something wrong with you. Instead of someone coming to me at 5 and saying, there's nothing wrong with you, you're deaf. That would have been a deaf gain moment, as opposed to the hearing loss moment that I had then. And growing up, I was very angry because I thought my family, the audiologist, everyone is wrong about me. How they describe me is not who I am. As soon as I was able to have that language and I had access to the language of sign language, I was able to fulfill who I am as a deaf person. And it didn't happen overnight. I had to keep looking for that deaf world and making those connections with the deaf world, and it didn't happen. And there were many nights when I didn't cry. I mean, I cried, and of course there were many nights when I came home laughing. So good luck to you. Thank you. All right, do we need to stop now? Okay, or did you have a question to ask me?
No, I'm just...
Tiffany has given me the look.
Yes, after years of doing ritual together, we know when we need to hook it up. I am just so very thankful that we could have Kirk with us here at Syracuse University. And I have to say, not many times can you say you are grateful for natural disasters. I am so thankful for Hurricane Sandy because it meant that Kirk got to visit our campus twice. And he was here in the fall. He preached at the Protestant Campus Ministry, and then he gets to be here today. He's going to actually be here today and tomorrow, and he's leaving on Friday. And so there is a lot of time for conversation. Tomorrow we'll be hosting a lunch here. Riddell, who has left, but you can get in touch with her. You can get in touch with me. There are still some spaces left at that lunch if you'd like to continue the conversation. We create temporary spaces all the time. And tonight was one of those temporary magical spaces. And so thank you, Kirk, for creating that and providing that for us. Can we offer Kirk our appreciation?
Thank you. One more thing, very, very key. There are some cupcakes left over there on the table. Help yourself. Thank you.